Well, thank you. I am extremely encouraged to see so many of you here tonight. It's a wonderful thing for those of us who care about our state and our country and everything else, because so many people don't. So many people, as the mayor said, accept the status quo. Obviously you don't, and your questions reveal that. You know, during the past year, I've had the opportunity to run around the state speaking to many Democratic committees since the presidential election. And I think the first response was shock. The second response was outrage. And the third response was, well, what are we going to do about it? I think it's time to turn the page on that and to think about what it means for our future. And when I see a crowd like this here tonight, I'm encouraged that we are prepared to take those steps that we need to do. Because it isn't simply that the wrong person won, it's what that person stands for and what they stand against. And they stand against us. And I don't say me and I don't say you, I say us. You know, one of the things about the Democratic Party, especially here in Massachusetts, is if you look around this room and you look around any room where Democrats are, you see the people of Massachusetts. You see the inclusion, you see the diversity, and that's not new. That's not something that just happened. It's something that we know we've had for years. Because when you talk about fighting for justice, fighting for economic advantage, whether it's through labor unions or otherwise, or civil rights, or anything, it's been through the Democratic Party, both at the national level and at the state level. And I think we as Democrats have to remember that and get our fight back and win these fights that are so important. And when you come to a place like Bristol County and New Bedford, Massachusetts, you see the effect of neglect. You see the effect of being shortchanged. And I know that's a pattern that has existed around here for a long time. I've been your Secretary of State for a long time also. And I've tried in my way to provide some equality. I've spent a lot of money, for instance, on historic tax credits. You have some magnificent historic buildings here in Bristol County and New Bedford, trying to rehabilitate them into housing and other things. I've spent a lot of time trying to provide equality when it comes to voting, because that is the power. And I'm very proud of that record. We've never had more people eligible to vote than we do now in Massachusetts. We introduced online voter registration. We had the most successful early voting program where we had 1 million people vote early in the presidential election. But candidly, that's not enough. It's not enough. We need to do more, because voting is power. Population is power. And power is what gets results. People spend money, governments spend money when they think they're responding to voters and responding to people. And the concerns that you voiced on so many issues are responded to when people in government say that's going to affect us. If you talk about public education, clearly there is a need for more money being spent on public education in Massachusetts. The fact that you have elite communities with high property taxes, and some of them might, to their credit, vote for higher property taxes to pay for education, but then you have cities and towns, older cities, that don't have enough money to properly educate their children. That's a serious problem. We talk about health care. Even though we have a very progressive health care policy, and we should be proud of the fact that as a state we moved forward on health care before the whole country did, the fact of the matter is, in regions around our state, you don't have in every case the best equipment, the best facilities, because the facilities respond to where the money is, where the power is. So I think the key to many of our issues is not to look at the past, but to talk about the future. Politics, when it's good, is not about the past, it's about the future. So I'm here to talk about the future tonight. The future tonight is, what are we going to do to empower New Bedford and Bristol County? That's the future. The first thing is, the United States Census is going to be taken in 2020, 2 years from March. I happen to be standing tonight in a city that has been historically undercounted. I've ran the census in 2000 and 2010, and I can tell you the frustration we had in trying to get the count correct in New Bedford and other cities and towns. And I can tell you why. 58% of the people rent. They don't own their homes in New Bedford. A high percentage of people do not have English, one of the highest in the states, as a primary language. You have a diversity of immigrant populations. Your populations, despite that, has committed 95,000. Personally, I believe you have well over 100,000 people here, and it's proven by the people you see walking around the streets. So I'm very concerned to make sure that when that 2020 count occurs, we get each and every person, because people is power. Having the people and the populations mean you're going to have more representation, you're going to protect the congressional representation you have, and you're going to get the respect of the government in Boston that hasn't always shown you that respect. It's one thing, and I say this, I don't mean to be condescending to what I do or what any other public official does, but it's one thing for us to come down here and every now and then give you a little prize. You don't need a little prize. You need a lot of help. You need help with your transportation issues. You need help with your education issues. You need help with your labor issues, your economy. You need the help across the board. And the way to get help is to get the respect of having voters and population. You have the population. We have to make sure they get counted. The second thing is to make sure that they are voters. As I said, I'm proud of what we've done, but we have more to do. And I want to do that. I stand on my record. We've, as I said, never had more voters. We've never had made it easier to vote than we've done it with early voting and other things. But that's the key. The key is having the power. We can all talk, and all of us are committed. We're committed citizens. We're committed to our communities. You're committed to your unions. All of those things are true. But we're talking to each other. The way we get the attention, whether it's Baker or Trump or any of those other people, is to exude the power of the politics of people voting, because that's what makes a difference. So those are the things that I want to speak to. And I think as we go forward, and we're planning for this census right now, we've already reached out. We know New Bedford is an undercounted area. I've been working with UMass on trying to identify specific neighborhoods. We know what we have to do. You know, I'm very proud of my election record, my record of running elections, because they've been fair and accurate. Trump, of course, as you know, insisted that there was fraud. The only fraud was him and the commission he set up. And they had a commission that they were going to prove fraud. Trump had this hallucination that he didn't win the popular vote because 3 million illegal people voted in the United States. He also, by the way, hallucinated that there were people from Massachusetts going to New Hampshire to vote illegally. That's why he lost New Hampshire. Yeah, on buses, right. If you see any of the buses, please let me know. The point is, it didn't happen. So he set up this phony commission that was going to investigate fraud. My belief is the pretext of the commission, or what was there for, was to put through a federal law to make it harder to vote. That's what he was really up to, and they were really up to. Well, I didn't give them any records. They demanded records. I refused. And several other states refused too. So the other day he disbanded his commission, and he's saying, because we wouldn't cooperate. Well, I'm proud we didn't cooperate, because that's what we have to do. It's also important, though, that we think about the future in terms of getting people to vote. And that's why I've been so aggressive in trying to improve on our systems to provide for online registration. Young people don't do anything on paper. We know that. So the only way to get them involved is when it's an online opportunity. We have that now. I introduced that. We also have early voting. I think these are the things that empower communities and empower people. I want to speak a brief word about labor. I have been in office for a long time. My opponent, I have an opponent in the primary, he accuses me I've been around too long. Well, I'm proud of my record. I'm also proud of the support I've had from organized labor throughout my career. And I work hard to get it. Because, you know, when we see people laid off, and I know you see a lot of it, and you see people laid off and they don't have a union, they have nothing to fall back on. Unions provide that bulk of support. We have right now an ongoing effort that I certified the other day to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. I think that's an outstanding effort. And I've told this not only to people who will benefit personally, but I've told it to people who are probably making more than that right now. And they complain about how their wages haven't grown. Well, the reason their wages haven't grown is because there's still people being paid less than you. If you are making more than $15 an hour and you want your wages to grow, help the people on the bottom. Raise them up and you'll be raised up too. And I'm proud of SEIU. I was able to take in the signatures from SEIU, and they had plenty, and we certified it, and it's on the ballot, and I'm very confident with a continuous effort we're going to pass that next November, whether the legislature acts on it or not. I was also proud to certify the effort of the Massachusetts Nurses Association to provide minimum standards of care for patients, because that's a critical issue as well. We see it, and I mentioned this already in terms of health care. Even though in Massachusetts many of our health care providers are, quote, non-profit, the funny thing about these non-profits is they are looking for profits. And if you look at how much they pay their managers and their presidents and their vice presidents, gee, they have a lot of profit. So we need to make sure that patients aren't left out in the process. And the hospitals are very opposed to this. They don't want anyone telling them what the minimum standard should be. But nurses care about their patients. They don't care about the managers and the presidents and the vice presidents and the contractors. So I was proud to take their petition and certify that, and that's before the legislature also. And if they don't pass it by April 30th, it's going to you folks. It's going to the ballot, and I think it'll pass too. These are the things that I think empower us in Massachusetts: the right to get laws passed by the people, the right to vote, the right to move forward. I mentioned to John Howcroft, when I first came here as a candidate many years ago, first of all, I think, and I'm a Boston native, I'm going to fess it up right away, but you know, we have this sort of hallucination that everybody knows who we are. Well, you go about 2 blocks down the street and no one knows who you are. It's humbling, but it's educational as well. And I remember coming here for the first time when I ran the first time and discovering, first of all, what a wonderful, hardworking, and diverse community it is. And then you become very convinced after a while that you've had a lot of hardship, a lot of hard luck, a lot of shortchanging. And I've tried to come back as much as I can. I've tried to be as supportive as I can, and I want to be supportive. But the best way that I can support you is to empower you, And so that's why I'm so thrilled to see so many of you here tonight, and why I'm here tonight, because working together, we can improve not only this community, our state, but we can take back our country too. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer any questions anybody has about elections. Go ahead, please.
You've really been a very good secretary.
Thank you.
Yes. I'm curious, what are the issues that your opposition now is saying, besides getting obviously wrong?
That's pretty much it.
Are there other issues that he is trying to
Not accurately. I mean, he has commented that I should be using historic preservation monies to provide for more affordable housing. I happen to bring with me all the affordable housing projects we've done in New Bedford for units. I'm sorry, she was asking him what are the criticisms of my administration been. And I mentioned the one that I've heard that I obviously dispute is using historic tax credits to provide more affordable housing. Right here in New Bedford, I have the list of all the projects that we funded for affordable housing. In fact, one of the principal things we do with historic tax credits, not just here in New Bedford, but around the state, is to take older mill buildings or industrial buildings, which often have wide open spaces, and they're easily convertible into housing because you have a good exterior structure, but you have open space in the middle, so it's much easier to convert them into housing. And we've insisted that much of it be affordable housing, so that's one of his criticisms. It would be more credible if he had a record of supporting both historic preservation or housing. He doesn't. To be honest with you, I'm not here to talk about him. I'm here to talk about me and answer your questions. But I think people are ambitious, and ambition is a good thing. I remember being young and ambitious. I'm still ambitious, perhaps not so young. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that I guess you have to justify yourself. I'm fond of pointing out to people, I have an obligation to justify my continuing presence in office. And I'm happy to argue for the things that I believe in. I think we've made a lot of progress. I run a lot of bureaucracies. And bureaucracies, as many of you know from your personal experiences, are not easy to deal with. But I think we've made progress. It's easier to get in business in Massachusetts. It's easier to register to vote. We protected historic properties. Most of the state, not here, although I do have it for technology, I run the land records in the Registry of Deeds. Technology here in the rest of the state, I actually run them directly. I think we've made progress there too. I could go on and on about the bureaucratic stuff, but there's nothing more important that I do than empowering voters and empowering communities. There's nothing. And if I have a message tonight beyond my interest and my personal campaign interest is this: it's critically important to our future and your future as a community that we count as many people as we can and we get them registered to vote. Now, there are some proposals out there about increasing voter participation registration, and I should speak to those. One is a proposal that has been around for a while for same-day voter registration. I support it, and I think that's the easier of the various competing proposals to put in. It would require us, however, as is often the case, and it came up in some of the discussions with Seti Warren, to spend money. If, for instance, if we're going to do that, which I think is the most efficient way, means you could go down to the polling place in your precinct on election day and register and vote at the same time. But to do that, we have to have a laptop in the precinct so they can find you where you were registered before, move you over. We also have to give the cities and towns more money to have an extra set of people there who only deal with newly registered. I mean, you're not going to tie up everybody in a presidential election while somebody digs out the utility bill. So that's something that I strongly support with the right money. And somebody made the comment about the legislature. I didn't see where you did. It's true. And unlike Mayor Warren, I was in the legislature, and I know Representative Casero was here a little while ago. I know, oh, he's still here, great. So it's not a magic potion, and it's, even if you're a member, it's not as easy as it might seem. But you have to have some expertise in getting legislation through. And so, as I said, I'm working to try to get the same day through because I think it's getting the money. And it's always hard. When we did early voting for the first time in '16, Baker, who I don't really think is for, I don't know what kind of voting he's for, if any, but he's certainly not for early voting because he vetoed the $400,000 I had planned to give out as grants in cities and towns. Well, there's a lot of things get vetoed, and you're competing against all the other good things that were vetoed. So how do you propel this forward? Well, I think I called upon my legislative expertise, and I went, and with the support of many good legislators, we overrode the veto. So we were able to provide money to cities and towns to run the extra hours and to do the weekend openings that we wanted. So it does require some expertise. The other voting expansion proposal is so-called automatic voter registration. Interesting idea. Some states have already done it, like California, but it's complex. What it would say is anytime you have any contact with a government agency, you're automatically registered whether you want to or not. You can only take yourself off. You can't put yourself on. The problem I have with that is which agencies are we talking about? We can do the registry of motor vehicles. That I can do. I can do mass health, I think. But I don't know that I can do every time somebody gets a gun license in a clerk's office that they're automatically registered to vote, and even transitional assistance, to be very honest, because of the multiple interactions the clients have with transitional assistance. I'm not sure how that will work, and who's going to give the cities and towns money to send these notices out all the time. So those are some of the practical problems. But I point to the progress we've made and we can make further. So many of you have worked on voter registration efforts, so many unions, and we do this all the time. We take their list and we compare it with our list because I have a central voter system, and I'm able to tell the union, these are your members who aren't registered, and they're able to go out and get them registered. Those are the things that make a difference. But I think, and I'll conclude with this, I'm happy to answer any other questions, but I think it's important. I think as a party and as a people, I think the shock of Trump's victory made us lose our way in some respects, and we questioned, how do we get here, and why aren't people with us? And I know John spoke to people who voted for Trump, probably regret it. I mean, what state could be worse than West Virginia? They voted for Trump by 25%. That used to be a very reliable Democratic state. What did he do? First thing he tried to do was screw their health care. I mean, all through last year, the best thing protecting our whole country was the incompetence of the Republicans in Congress. Unfortunately, with the passage of the tax bill, they seem to become minimally competent. So it presents a fearful opportunity for the few months that they will hopefully have remaining in power. But the fact of the matter is that I think as a party and as a people, we have to remember that it's our collective effort that has made the progress that we have in this country. Whether it's the unions that found their feet under Franklin Roosevelt and forward, and the protection they offered workers, or our common commitment to justice. You know, you think back through all the various things that happened over the last 50 years or 60 years, and it's our commitment to justice. It's the Democratic Party, and there were a lot of Democrats that were very difficult to persuade. We know the history. But the fact of the matter is our party has constantly been trying to lift up people and help people make progress economically, in life. We've been the fair civil rights party. We've been the justice party. And we have nothing to be ashamed of. We haven't lost our way. We need to reassert our message. We need to lead. We need to talk about the things that need to be done, because by doing that, people will come to it. As I said, those poor people in West Virginia, they voted for Trump, 25 points. What do they got for it? Nothing. I think we can say we have something to offer. Our solutions aren't always perfect. Obamacare is an example. Not perfect, but better than what we had. And our solutions are the solutions that I think will help people. Okay, the primary. We are having a primary, as you know. We have to have a primary. We have a couple of problems, which we think we reached the solution. The first problem is that there is a federal law, a legitimate federal law actually, that's been around for a while called the MOVE Act. The only problem I have with federal laws is they need to put these little catchy little acronyms on them, the MOVE Act. It stands for Military and Overseas Voters. And what it says is we have to have absentee ballots available for military ballots 45 days before a federal election, and every election is a federal election because you're voting for members of Congress. Okay, if you're a state like ours that has had a history of September primaries, that says it has to be the front part of September. Well, if we look at this particular calendar year, we have 2 Jewish holidays on Tuesdays. The 18th of September is Yom Kippur, and the 11th of September is Rosh Hashanah, Jewish New Year. In past years when this has happened, we've been able to get the legislature to pass a statute to adjust it for a certain day. So for instance, in 2014, the primary was held on September 9th. So ideally this year, September 11th would have worked. But it's the second day of Rosh Hashanah, can't do it. In past years, the legislature has grappled with this problem itself. This year they decided, give it to me. They thought they were doing me a favor. So they passed a law saying, you decide. But they put a few restrictions on me. I mean, they're trusting, but not that trusting. So they said, it's got to be within 7 days of the second Tuesday. Well, the second Tuesday is September 11th, 7 days. Okay, we can do that. Well, 7 days after is the 18th, can't do that. So now 7 days before. So then we said, well, could we do Thursday? We've done Thursday a couple of times. We did it in 16, we did it in 12. So we started looking at that. The problem is many schools open for the first day on Thursday, that Thursday. And a school opening day is not a day you want to try to have voting going on at the same time. And we had a lot of pushback from various groups. So even though I had to make this, and it was not an easy decision, the date of the primary will be September 4th, which is the day after Labor Day, which is its own problem. However, to help with that problem, we have the present President of the Senate, Harriet Chandler, who's a very good person from Worcester. I went to her and I said, can you help me? The current law on early voting does not allow for it to be used in primaries, only elections. But since we have this problem with the date, I have proposed to her, and she's agreed to sponsor, a bill that would allow for 5 days of early voting prior to primaries. So that would give people 6 days to vote in the primary, which I think should address the problem of this year. Going forward in the future, we probably have to think about whether it should be in September or when it is about, because we're going to have these continuing problems. But I think with the passage of the early voting proposal, I have spoken to the Speaker of the House. I spoke to him this morning. He's open-minded on it. So I'm hopeful we're going to get that through. So the primary will be on September 4th, and we'll have 5 days before that for early voting, which, as you may recall, means you can go to your town hall and vote without any reason. Some communities have added extra locations. It worked out pretty well. But unfortunately, this year, because of the way it's falling with the holidays and it's falling with the MOVE business, the 45-day business, that was the only option we really had. So it's not a great one, but that's where we're at.
So as someone who only came here 30 years ago, the whole idea of the September primary seems insane to me anyway, and tends to work against democratic interest because we always have very lively primaries.
Right.
So people get a year and a half to beat up on each other, and then they have 6 weeks to
Right.
coalesce and run against the Republicans.
To that point, let me just mention, to conclude on the primary date issue, I was at a forum in Brookline of all 3 gubernatorial candidates, and all of them pretty much said, we want it as early as possible because we want to have more time. And so that was another factor in the 4th, but I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, so you have a kind of a long view on this. Why has there never been promotion within the legislature to move it to June?
I will answer you with a story, a very short story. When I first went to the legislature, and I won't tell you what year, but I was very excited to be there. I got elected pretty young. And I proposed bills to make it easier to get on the ballot, including for state representative, which is what I was. And there was this elderly gentleman who was the senior member of the House. His name was Paul Feeney. And he one day pulled me aside and said, young man, may I speak to you? And I said, oh, I'm thrilled. Mr. Feeney is speaking to me. And I said, I want to ask you, and he mentioned the number of the bill. I had forgotten the number of the bill. And he says, have you really thought about that? And I said, what is it about? And he told me it's make it easier to get on the ballot. And I said, well, I think it's very important, Mr. Feeney, that we have access to the ballot. He said, young man, you will learn when you're winning the game, you don't change the rules. And that's kind of the answer to your question.
But statewide, we're not?
We're not, but they live in the past.
Okay.
In most parts of the state, when it comes to the legislature, it's not about the election, it's about the primary. And so that's why they're very reluctant. And even this 5 days I'm proposing, the Senate, which has a slightly broader view, Chandler had no problem, you know. House, he said he has to see his members and talk to his members. I'm still optimistic on the 5 days, but it speaks to the bigger problem about any kind of electoral rules change. I mean, I've had a pretty good track record of getting stuff through, but not perfect, because I run up against the same resistance. It's about the money. You know, when I say I need more money, we will have voting anyways. Well, no, you won't. I mean, it costs money. It costs money. I mean, there's no easy way to do it. It costs money. So, like I said, I think there is an institutional resistance to it based upon the fact that the processes work for the incumbents. I mean, there is that. I can't deny that. I'm not going to deny it. I'm going to say it's true. So, yes.
How will those 5 days work? I mean, will you be counting Labor Day and Saturday and
No.
Sunday? Okay, so you're,
Before.
okay.
No, we're not. That's the whole idea. In other words, it's 5 days in the week before. Now, the only question that's come up is, should we give communities the option of making one of the days a Saturday, which we're still talking about that. The problem with I think the weekend thing worked out pretty well in the early voting, okay? We did get resistance from clerks, and that's why the 400 grand I mentioned, that's what I used. I'll use the polite word, to incent them. I won't use the word bribe. But I remember calling the clerk in Burlington, which Burlington's a pretty big sized town. It's got 20,000 voters. She said, absolutely not. I said, well, I'll give you money, open the week. No, she refused. The law gave them the right to refuse, and they did. Most of them, however, and I want to be fair, because the clerks did a great job with early voting. They did. And they were reluctant at first. But that, again, comes from the experience you have in trying to persuade people. I've learned by, I should say, error and trial, instead of trial and error, that if you go to people and say, you will do this, they won't. If you go to people and say, do you have an idea how we can do that? They might. And that's the way you have to go. And I think we had a great deal of progress with the clerks, and I think it was a phenomenal success. And I think it enhanced the ability of people to participate, not just the people who voted early, which was the 1 million people, but it made it easier for the 2 million people that showed up on election day because they didn't have to wait in line as long because we took 1 million out of the process. We're not going to have those kind of numbers in a state primary, most likely. If we have 500,000, that'd be probably the ballpark. But still, it gives the real issue here about the early voting is to compensate for the fact that it's at an awkward date. But I can't do anything about the date. I mean, I'm stuck with the 7 days and the MOVE Act, so, you know, I'm not convinced that putting it on Thursday, because when we had it on Thursday, we had people saying, oh, it's not election day. We didn't know it was election day. It's confusing. They don't know. I mean, people vote on different, some towns.
Get the word out so that everybody
Well, we'll do that. We'll definitely put the word out. But, you know, I mean, some towns, as you know, vote on Monday, their town election. Some towns vote on Saturday. So there's no magic day. But I think with 5 days in the week before and the day, that's 6 days to vote. I mean, if you can't make it in 6 days, well, I don't know. Plus your absentees. Yes?
I have to say I appreciate the consideration of Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. Those are the highest holy days.
Yes, I know.
So I appreciate that very much. And perhaps when you're talking about Saturday as well, that's their Sabbath.
That's
And
correct.
so it's very hard to work around because we truly haven't separated church and state.
No.
So, but I appreciate the effort to do that, and I believe
Well,
that
in some
it's the right thing.
communities with the early voting in 16, they chose to open on Sunday because they did have significant Jewish population. So, and some did both. I mean, there were some that embraced it, and it was very successful, and some not so much. It's really about the opportunity to participate, and it gives us the opportunity because, you know, one of the things about early voting and absentee voting is this: everyone doesn't work in the same community where they live. And if you have young children or childcare issues or school issues, you may not get back. I mean, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. sounds like a long time, but not if you have to pick up children or you have to go, or more than one job. I mean, so that's why the early piece, I think, worked out so well. And that's why I'm anxious to try to make it more permanent. But I think right now it's an emergency. We have to get this opportunity out there to participate, and that's what I hope to do. As I said, Senator Chandler, I have not had a chance to talk to Senator Montigny. I'm sure he'll be supportive. I'm pretty optimistic about the Senate. The House, I believe we'll make progress with. I really do. The date of the primaries will be September 4th, Tuesday, September 4th, and the polls will be open statewide from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on that day. I have a proposal, and I want to make it clear, this is a proposal which I hope to have enacted, which I do require legislative approval for, that we would have 5 days in the preceding week that would be for early voting, which means you would have the right to go to your city and town hall and vote in person without having to offer any reason of illness or out of town. Some communities, if we follow the same process for early voting we did before, may add additional sites in some of the larger communities where people can go. That's what we did in 2016. So I'm encouraged to see all of you here tonight. I really am. This is one of the largest crowds I've seen in a while, and I'm delighted. And I encourage you, I ask you for your support, but I want to support you too, because you did the right thing, and I'm very proud of you. Thank you.